Yes, so I'm delighted to be joined by Haras Rafiq, who is the Chief Executive of Quilliam, so that's an anti-extremism think tank. Now, so just before we went on, you were talking about how you think there's a triple threat to Britain and I guess the world more generally in terms of extremism. Perhaps you kind of outline again what that is.
The triple threat is something that we've been talking about for a long time. It's the far right, or populism, which is a better word, the regressive left as opposed to the left, and then theocratic Islamism. It's almost like, as we said in the past, the left eye is covering itself up, the right eye is bursting a blood vessel, the theocrats are saying they've got heavenly inspiration from above. And this really is causing a lot of the polarisation that we're seeing in our societies at the moment.
I mean, of those three threats, is there one that you identify as being particularly prominent at the moment?
Within the triple threat, the one that's killed the most people sort of post-2001 around the world is Islamist jihadism. And it's very important to differentiate between Islam, the religion, and Islamism. Just as we've got a difference between social and socialism, social is the way that we interact, and socialism is a distinct political ideology that happens to be left of centre. Islam is a religion that's practiced by different people around the world in many, many different ways. Islamism is a distinct political ideology that wants two things: set up a utopian state and enforce Sharia, a state law, a version of Sharia, and the second thing they want to do is spread that around the world. It's a contemporary phenomenon, and jihadism is something, an ideology that actually says that the use of violence to promote Islamism's goals is legitimate. So jihadism and Islamist terrorism has killed more people sort of post-2001 than any other threat in the world right now from a terrorist perspective. However, in the UK, what we've seen is that far-right and populist violence is actually on the increase. If you look at the government's Channel programme, in parts of Wales over the last year, there have been 50% of the referrals to Channel, the Prevent programme, have been far-right. And nationally, around about a third have been far-right. It's the single biggest growing terrorist threat, but it's still not as big as Islamist terrorism.
I mean, do you think the far right and far right and slash populists and Islamist extremists kind of act as recruiting sergeants for each other, that they play off each other to some extent?
Well, absolutely. If you look at the relationship between the two and the ideas and the messages that they promote, so for example, Islamism promotes messages such as the West is at war with Islam and that all Westerners hate Muslims. If you take the same ideas and rotate them just by 180 degrees, you see that the far right or populists, what they say is that Islam is at war with the West and Muslims hate non-Muslims. So the ideas are very, very similar. A recent phenomenon is that we, in the UK, the Home Secretary has just recently prescribed all of the wings of Hezbollah. Hezbollah now is a prescribed entity. Nick Griffin, who we all know as the former leader of the now defunct British National Party, recently had a meeting in Lebanon with the Lebanese head of Hezbollah. So, if we look through history, there is a relationship between the far right and populism and Islamism. And one of the things that they actually have in common, and they have it in common with the far left, the regressive left as well, is anti-Semitism.
Yeah. Now, it's also very interesting that you mentioned the meeting in Lebanon. Now, someone else who's met Hezbollah, or figures from Hezbollah, is the current Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, do you think it's shocking that there are people on the left, and obviously very senior up the British left, who have been prepared to associate with and even befriend Islamist extremists?
I think it's dangerous for Britain, for the UK, if somebody like Jeremy Corbyn, who has been a supporter of Hamas and other terrorist entities, becomes Prime Minister, because he has an affinity, he has sympathy and empathy, and certainly supports some of their values and their ideas. And if he was to be elected Prime Minister, we all know that just as currently Momentum and the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn is isolating ordinary Muslims who are not Islamists, that's what he'll do when he's in government.
Now, so obviously, I mean, we were talking earlier about how there's a section of the Liberal left who probably should be all natural allies against extremism who don't always behave that way. So, for example, the Southern Poverty Centre, I think it was, who labelled you Islamophobic, I think. I mean, does this really shock you when this is coming from people who you think should be on your own side? And why do you think that is?
So when I was growing up in the 80s onwards, I remember the Southern Poverty Law Centre was an organisation that I looked up to. They were an organisation that actually virtually bankrupt a chapter of the KKK in the US. And I saw them as role models, if you like, as heroes, somebody who was standing up for people of colour, and they were from the left. When they decided to name Majid Nawaz, our founder, and Quilliam as anti-Muslim extremists, this was actually, first of all, hateful, hurtful, and also it was something that had a serious impact on our ability to do the work that we're carrying out, which is why we had no choice but to take them to court. And just before it went to court, they settled with us and gave us a full-throated apology. The left, or the far left, the regressive left, is suffering from something that we call the bigotry of low expectations. They will stand up for LGBT rights, they will stand up for discrimination, they will stand up against xenophobia, racism, etc., but not when it's Muslims. It's almost neo-Orientalism, where they believe that it's almost like, in inverted commas, the savages don't know better. And it is worrying. It's something that we've seen happening in the UK over sort of the last 10 to 12 years, this sort of entryism into the left. And we're seeing one of the manifestations in the current anti-Semitism that's been reported extensively.
So kind of changing tack slightly. Obviously, do you think there's a time when we were, kind of as a country, as a society, quite naive to the threat of Islamist extremism, perhaps prior to 7/7 or perhaps prior to the Islamic State developing? Do you think we're in that kind of period now with far-right extremism? We're naive about the level of the threat, and it's going to take, obviously it could take a kind of awful wake-up moment to make to our attention?
But for decades, the UK government, civil society has been funding and supporting Islamists in the UK, either from a political perspective or actually giving them money because they were the loudest, they were the most professional, they were organised, they were political. And then when we had 7/7, all of a sudden there was a realisation that actually, perhaps for decades now, Tony Blair and before him, Howard from the Conservative Party, were actually dealing with and supporting the wrong people. It took a long time for the government to actually remove Islamists from the table, then they came back and then removed them again. And the threats and the violence that we've seen over the last sort of 14 years has really been a wake-up call. And I think that we'll never get to grips fully from a security services perspective, which is why a civil society response is needed. With the far right and populism, interventionists, experts have been talking about the growth of the far right for a long time. We've got a report on our website called In and Out of Extremism, which we published about 4 years ago, where we talked about 5 former far right people and 5 former Islamists that we helped to rehabilitate and bring them into the middle. So we've been working on this for a while. I think that civil society, until the Christchurch attack, has really not considered the far right and populism as a violent threat, because we haven't seen, thank God, the number of murders and terrorist activities that we've seen from Islamism in the UK. Christchurch was a wake-up moment. I think that the statistics show through Channel that the far right is growing, and I think that people are starting to take it a lot more seriously. But it is a case of resources for our agencies, whether they're the police, whether it's the security services. They have to prioritise on the imminent danger, and they have made some arrests of people who were about to carry out attacks on Muslims and on some people from the Jewish diaspora as well. I think more will be done, but the problem is that 5%, the demographics are that just under 5% of people in the UK or England and Wales are actually Muslims. So that's a recruitment for Islamists amongst that just under 5% and anybody else that might convert to Islam. There's a bigger percentage of the population that the far right can recruit from, the other 95%. If the far right or populism gains as much traction as Islamist jihadism does, we've got serious problems. One day Middle England could wake up and say, you know what, we don't like Muslims and we're going to actually be violent towards Muslims, and then even people like me have a problem.
Now, obviously, as you mentioned, far-right populist extremists have a bigger recruitment pool. Presumably that means that unlike Islamist extremists, they could be electorally successful in the UK. Islamism is an electoral dead end in the UK, I thought, because of you restricted 75% of the population. Well, possibly. I mean, does the kind of electoral threat from populist dash the far right worry you?
We currently actually have people who are supporters of Islamism, supporters of the Islamist states around the world, who are elected to the House of Commons, people who are part of the Jeremy Corbyn's front bench, if you like. So it doesn't mean that Islamists, our current system does not mean that Islamists won't be elected if they infiltrate, or rather, it doesn't mean that Islamists won't be elected if they join parties, mainstream parties like Labour or Conservative. Far-right parties historically, group parties such as the BNP, haven't had as much success because of the system that we have, the first past the post system, which actually, some people will argue that proportional representation is a better, a more fairer way of actually electing. But in actual fact, the current system is something that prevents extremist parties such as the BNP, or if we had an equivalent to the Muslim Brotherhood standing for election as a party here, or others, being elected. And the only way that they will get their members into the House of Commons is by actually joining other parties, and that does happen. Do you want me to name those people?
Yeah, go on then, if you're happy to.
I've written about it.
Yeah, no, please do.
One particular person that springs to mind that is a supporter of Islamism, and I've written about this on our Quilliam journal, is Afzal Khan. He's the MP for Gorton in Manchester. He's on the record as supporting going to events that commemorate anniversaries of the Islamist Iranian state post the revolution. And there are others, and generally they tend to, when they're looking for votes and when they're looking within the Muslim communities, they generally support Islamist organisations more than they would support non-Islamist Muslim organisations.
I mean, how concerned are you about Jeremy Corbyn personally? Because I know that Corbyn has himself attended a celebration of the Iranian Revolution. I think it was in 2012, 2013.
So Corbyn used to work for the Iranian state-funded Press TV. I don't think Corbyn ever expected to become leader of the Labour Party, and I don't think he ever expected to potentially become the Prime Minister. If he becomes the Prime Minister, we've got a problem. And the problem manifests itself in a number of ways. One is the anti-Semitism that's been written about extensively. The other thing is that he and certainly the Momentum part of the Labour Party have totally excluded non-Islamist supporting Muslim organisations and individuals, and only work with individuals and organisations that have supported Islamism and have supported groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. So if he becomes Prime Minister, there's nothing that suggests that he won't do more of the same. There'll be more anti-Semitism, at this time emanating certainly from 10 Downing Street, and there'll be more support for Islamist organisations at the detriment of all the good work that's been done over the last 14 years or so post 7/7. And I think it would put us in a very, very dangerous situation. He has called Hamas and Hezbollah his friends. He has supported the IRA in the past. He's been a protest politician who I don't believe ever expected to become Prime Minister.
I mean, if Corbyn and Labour do form the next government, I mean, do you think it would create the kind of the perfect conditions for a radicalisation of British politics more generally, including on the right? So having someone in number 11 Downing Street who praised the bombs and bullets of the IRA, I mean, do you think that would create kind of near perfect conditions for a hard right or far right backlash?
Throughout the world now, we're seeing polarisation. We've seen the loss of the middle ground. We're seeing it in the US, we're seeing it in the UK, but from the US we're seeing it more from a populist perspective, and in the UK we're seeing it more from a regressive left perspective. If the regressive left was to get into government, we would see a response from them, from the far right and populist, because they would consider themselves as the only people that are actually standing up to the regressive left. And we'd see the symbiotic relationship that we have seen with Islamists and the far right go on to really complete the circle, if you like, and have a symbiotic relationship between the far right and the aggressive far left. If you, it's a bit like a horseshoe actually. If you actually go round enough, the far left and the far right do actually join, but they have a hate for each other, which is a legacy-based hate, which sometimes it doesn't reflect in the policies, because they are both anti-Semitic. They are, but lots of things to share in common. But we will see growth in the far right if the far left, the regressive left under Jeremy Corbyn, actually takes the reins, if you like, in the House of Commons.
I mean, do you still think there's a bit of naivety on the kind of liberal left mainstream about just how pernicious the far left can be, and just how dangerous they potentially could be?
I think when we saw the far left take control of the reins within the Labour Party, I think there was a lot of naivety. But since then, we've seen people like Hilary Benn and a number of other people within the Labour Party, within the progressive left, actually challenge internally what's happening within the Labour Party. They haven't won the battle. Many of them have actually left the Labour Party as well because they've recognised, there isn't a lot that they can do about the growth of the far left and the policies that they have. Some are still trying to actually stay within and fight the system. What we are seeing is that people on the fringes of the far left actually, first of all, becoming a lot more emboldened, but also recruiting other people from within the centre left. So we're seeing a growth of this, whether it's on social media, whether it's in policies, whether it's in recommendations, and that's a very, very sad reality. I envisage that many of the people within the progressive left, the centre left, will actually end up either winning the battle, over the next couple of election cycles, because we've seen this before, within the Labour Party, but not quite as bad as this, or they will leave. But I also think that one of the reasons why the centre left is actually still remaining within the Labour Party is that they haven't found a home where they can go. We've recently seen the independent group, where we've seen some people from the Conservative Party, some people from Labour, etc., who've come together and named and formed a new political party. Maybe that's somewhere where some of them can go. But again, currently they don't have enough members or enough support around the country to be able to form a government. And I don't think that is a home yet. I don't think that that's yet considered a home for many of the people who are centre-left and more progressive.
I mean, just one final question. So obviously several hundred British nationals went out and joined ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Some of those are now trying to head back, or even already have headed back to the UK. I mean, how do you think that both government and society more broadly should respond?
I think the first thing is that one of the things that some of the left, many Islamists and some Muslims have said in the past is that the radicalisation of the people that went out to join ISIS has got nothing to do with ideology, it's a whole bunch of other things. And then when we had the Christchurch attack, a lot of the same people started talking about ideology, and they couldn't see the hypocrisy in the two statements. They would start to blame foreign policy as a reason why people would go out to Iraq and Syria and join ISIS. Well, what's our foreign policy got to do with Muslims travelling thousands of miles from the UK and going to join ISIS to kill other Muslims? It just doesn't make sense. There is an ideological element, which is a big element. There are other factors as well. ISIS now has lost its ground. It hasn't been defeated ideologically, it's gone back to what it was before, and that is part of the global jihadist insurgency. What this means is there are a lot of people who want to come back, and we've seen some recent high-profile incidents. Shamima Begum is one, and a whole bunch of others. We believe as Quilliam, as an organisation, that there has to be consistency, first of all, in the approach we take to terrorists that are foreigners, that in the UK, and our British terrorists that have gone out to join ISIS. We spent around about 10 years trying to deport Abu Qatada, who was a senior recruiter for Al-Qaeda, back to Jordan, because he wasn't British. He was from Jordan. Eventually the conditions were right, and we managed to deport him. Similarly, we should take our British citizens back to the UK. If they only have UK nationality, we should bring them back, we should prosecute them, we should, somebody like Shamima Begum has broken at least one law, and that's the Terrorism 2006 Act, and probably many others, and I'm sure our agencies are looking for evidence. A lot of these people fit into a number of categories, three main ones though: disturbed, disillusioned, and potentially dangerous. We need to bring them back, throw the full weight of the law, prosecute them, because they are our problems. We don't deport our terrorists around the world like we used to do in the past with Australia. Take them through de-radicalisation and rehabilitation programmes and see if we can actually rehabilitate some of them. There have been some really, really good test cases. Tanya Joya is one, for example. Our own president, Nouman bin Uthman, and Majid Nawaz, our founder, both were leading Islamists at one time, and Nouman was in Afghanistan fighting alongside people like bin Laden as the head of the Libyan contingency against the Soviets. And then when bin Laden said he wanted to attack American interests, he left, set up the LIFG, now disavowed the whole ideology and theology, and counters that now. Imagine Nawaz, who was a senior member of Hizb ut-Tahrir, trying to recruit for Hizb ut-Tahrir in Egypt, was rounded up and arrested and locked away for 5 years as a political prisoner, not a terrorist. Now has disavowed the whole ideology and theology, and I could go on and on. There are some good cases where people have been de-radicalised and rehabilitated, and they can and may want to actually do something about the things that they've done in the past. We should bring them back, throw the full force of the law. We're better than ISIS. We are a country, a nation that is, believes in the rule of law, and then try to de-radicalise and rehabilitate them.
So Haras, so thank you so much for your time. It's been very kind, and all the best of your work.
My pleasure.